The future of space exploration is settling down on the moon. For decades, our sights have been set on reaching Mars. We've sent robotic rovers there and spent millions trying to figure out if life existed or ever did exist there, and we're still trying to get people there. But what if instead of looking forward, we looked back? What if we settled down on the moon before we go to Mars? Well, that's not such a crazy idea. In fact, it's something that NASA and its partners are seriously considering. They're going to build a city on the moon. But how will they do it? For all the latest news delivered right to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter. Click the link below to get started. Everyone knows that building a city is hard. You have to get enough funding, get the machinery there, manage the workers, watch out for protests. The list goes on. But compared to building a city on the moon, those problems seem pretty trivial. How would you even begin to construct a city on the moon? Well, NASA has an idea. It's part of their Artemis Accords, their plan to send humans back to the moon. The goal is to establish a permanent base there, but that's about as far as they've gotten. That's why the next few years are so important. The Artemis missions 4 through 10 are going to be focusing on establishing a moon base and figuring out how to live there long term. As the name suggests, these bases will likely take the form of cities, rather than just a station or two. So how will they actually build these moon cities? One of the biggest issues facing the Artemis missions is landing safely on the moon. You might think that's a problem we already solved 50 years ago, but it's a lot harder when you have to worry about bringing back supplies and crew. If you've seen footage of the moon landings, then you probably remember this. A massive dust cloud kicking up around the lunar module as it took off from the moon and headed back to orbit. That dust can cause all kinds of problems. Not only does it kick up into the engines and reduce visibility, but it can also damage equipment and even wreck a launch. This isn't a big issue when it's just a couple of astronauts leaving the moon, but it is a major concern for a moon base that is going to be launching and landing regularly. To make matters worse, the moon doesn't have much of an atmosphere, which means that dust particles move way faster and pack way more punch than they do on Earth. So how are NASA and its partners planning to deal with all that dust? One answer could be found in the most unexpected of places, India. In 2008, India launched the Chandrayaan-1 mission to orbit the moon. One of the spacecraft's instruments was a laser-induced breakdown spectrometer, basically a device used to identify elements by shooting a laser at them. The spectrometer found evidence of water in the form of hydroxyl ions, which means there could be water ice somewhere on the moon. It turns out that this could be useful for more than just future moon bases. If there's water on the moon, it could be used to extract oxygen and hydrogen, both of which could be used as rocket fuel. And there is already a plan in place to use this method to refuel rockets in orbit around the moon. The plan is called the Lunar Crater Radio Telescope, or LCRT. The idea is to use a giant radio telescope to search for signs of life in deep space, while also testing technologies like solar power and communications. The telescope will be built in the floor of a permanently shadowed crater at the Moon's North Pole, where temperatures are always kept low enough for water ice to exist. The LCRT will use lasers to vaporize the surface layer of the ice, extracting oxygen and hydrogen. Then using solar power, they'll turn that into rocket fuel. This would be great for refueling rockets already in lunar orbit, but it wouldn't really help with the dust problem. So how can we solve that? While NASA and their partners are looking at ways to use water to help with the dust, one team is looking at a different kind of solution: glass. The European Space Agency is experimenting with melting lunar dust into glass bricks, which could be used to construct buildings or even the walls of entire domes. And it's surprisingly easy to do. All you need is heat and pressure. ESA researchers created their glass by compacting lunar soil simulant and basalt rock, then heating it to 1500 degrees Celsius for 3 hours. The mixture melted, and once it cooled, formed a solid mass of glass. So far, the glass seems to be strong and resistant to radiation. There's even some evidence that growing crystals inside the glass could make it stronger still. Now, this isn't the first time someone's tried to make glass out of moon dust. In 1970, a Corning scientist named Brian Wilkins combined ground-up moon rocks with raw materials commonly used in. The resulting glass was clear and didn't degrade when exposed to the vacuum of space. However, his recipe wasn't very practical. It required rare earth minerals and lots of energy to produce. ESA hopes that their method is much more efficient and cost-effective, which is good because they want to make more than just glass. The ESA's research doesn't end with glass bricks and window panes. They also want to find ways to use 3D printing to build structures out of the glass. Using robots to print structures is nothing new. NASA has already figured out how to 3D print structures here on Earth, but this is usually done with plastics or metal. Doing it with glass would be a whole new challenge. Glass is already hard to work with, but lunar glass is even trickier because it's full of tiny shards of rock. Despite the difficulty, it could pay off in the long run. ESA researchers believe that glass printed with the right mix of lunar dust could be strong enough to resist meteorite impacts, so it could protect the people living in the moon base from harm. But before anyone starts laying down any foundations, NASA needs to learn a little bit more about the moon. That's why they're investing in so many research projects right now. Some of the research is focused on things like temperature and radiation, but other research focuses on how the human body reacts to living on the moon. After all, there is no point in building a moon base if we do want to know how long-term habitation affects the human body. That's why NASA is investing heavily in their Human Health and Performance Exploration Analog, or H2P2E, a study that will see participants spend a year in an analog environment to test the effects on the body. The reason for this is simple. On Earth, gravity helps keep our muscles and bones strong and healthy. But on the moon, gravity is only about 1/6 as strong as it is here. That means that over time, the human body would become weaker. Of course, we're talking about weeks, months, or maybe even years of living on the moon before that would become a problem. But better safe than sorry. That's why NASA has set up H2P2E. Their goal is to find out how living in such a weak gravity environment affects the human body. To do that, they recruited 12 male volunteers who were given the nickname Crew 1. These guys have been locked up in a mock moon base here on Earth since June 2022. They spend most of their days doing experiments and training, but also take time to simulate what life in a moon base would be like. They eat together, talk to each other, and generally try to make the experience feel as real as possible. Of course, there's no way to simulate zero-G conditions on the Earth, but the crew still gets to experience some pretty low-gravity environments thanks to NASA. By studying how Crew 1 reacts to low-gravity environments, NASA will have a much better understanding of how to keep people safe on the moon. As the Artemis program moves forward, there will be more and more opportunities for people to live on the moon and conduct research. Who knows? Maybe one day soon we'll all be able to live in our very own moon cities. At the moment though, plans for moon cities are still in the very early stages. We won't be seeing any major developments until at least the 2030s. But that doesn't mean we can't start thinking about them now. Do you think humanity will ever settle on the moon? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to learn more about space exploration.